Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Buenas tardes, damas y caballeros. The program will begin in about 5 minutes. El programa comenzará en unos 5 minutos. Gracias. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Buenas tardes. It's a great pleasure of mine to introduce the 7th president of Rice University, David Lebron, to present our guest speaker today. Es un honor para mí presentarle al séptimo rector de Rice University, para presentarle al maestro Mario Vargas Llosa.
Good afternoon and welcome to Rice University. It is a pleasure to welcome you to the Shepherd School of Music's beautiful Studi Concert Hall, which is most often where our spectacular student orchestra performs. We thank you for joining us on this Halloween afternoon. While we have a stimulating afternoon ahead of us, I don't think, with one exception, it's going to be too scary. I'm especially pleased that so many of our friends from the Casa Cultural de las Americas are here with us today. And I understand that many of you have traveled with us even from outside Houston, and we're happy that you have come to the Rice campus for this extraordinary event. The President's Lecture Series is the oldest and most distinguished speaker program that Rice University presents for our community. It's meant to be a platform for the most influential thinkers of the day to share with our communities their expertise, stories, or other intellectual enterprise or creation so that we may be enriched and challenged by what they have to say. The President's Lecture Series is supported by the J. Newton Razor Lecture Fund. Over the years, we have welcomed activists, scientists, and economists, as well as physicians, philosophers, other scholars and artists, and even on at least one occasion, a lawyer, from across the spectrum of human endeavor. Today's distinguished speaker continues this important tradition. Only a handful of speakers in the past decades have come already decorated with what most regard as the world's highest honor in literature, the Swedish Academy's Nobel Prize. Mario Vargas Llosa's work has stood this test of time, and he is an influential global voice. Today, we are thrilled to be partnering with the Casa Cultural de las Americas, one of Houston's youngest but most vibrant cultural institutions. I am particularly grateful to its president, Dr. Elizabeth Schiele, and to all of her hardworking staff who have made Mr. Vargas Llosa's visit to Houston and to Rice University possible. We simply could not have hosted this event without their help. This is a wonderful example of the kind of partnership that Rice seeks to build with other vibrant cultural, artistic, educational, medical, scientific, and commercial institutions of our great city. One doesn't have to be a literary scholar to be aware of the so-called Latin American boom that took place in publishing houses and marketplaces around the world over the past half-century. Many of you may know that today's speaker, Mario Vargas Llosa, is along with a small cadre of other talented writers, including the late Carlos Fuentes, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and Jose Donoso, led this charge, bringing a new brand of fiction to the world's readers. Our speaker this afternoon is, no doubt, well known to almost all of you, and so we'll keep the introduction brief. Since publishing his first novel in 1962, he has gone on to author some 45 other works of fiction, nonfiction, and theater, which have transformed the literature not only in the Spanish-speaking world, but across the globe. The Nobel Committee that named him the recipient of the Nobel Prize for Literature in 2010 did so, quote, for his cartography of structures of power and trenchant images of the individual's resistance, revolt, and defeat. Whether inside the dorms and classrooms of a military school in Lima, on the pews of a darkened cathedral, or even among the special visitor services of the Peruvian military in the Amazonian basin, Mario Vargas Llosa's work has illuminated the vagaries of bureaucracy and power, as well as the forces, both petty and consequential, that impact the lives of his novel's character. His work has transcended the locality of its origins, many times Peru, but also other locales across the Americas or in Europe, to say something more broadly about what it is to be human and how we comport ourselves together in society and in our personal relationship. In his writing, he has taught us about ourselves as often only literature can do in meaningful ways. Or to put it another way, indeed, as he put it himself in his own Nobel lecture, Mario Vargas Llosa has devoted, quote, most of his time to the passion, the vice, the marvel of writing, creating a parallel life where we can take refuge against adversity, one that makes the extraordinary natural and the natural extraordinary, that dissipates chaos, beautifies ugliness, eternalizes the moment, and turns death into a passing spectacle. And of course, those who delight in the power of his fiction are the better for having entered his fictional world. We are grateful for his own commitment to this vice, as he put it, which he has doggedly pursued throughout his career across half a century. He has been an important political voice as well, and indeed was a candidate in 1990 for the presidency of Peru. As The Economist wrote, quote, for not only is Mr. Vargas Llosa Latin America's most accomplished living writer, he is also a thinker who battles for democracy, the market economy, and individual liberty. Over the last decade, in art, history, literature, political science, and public policy, we have sought at Rice University to greatly enhance our commitment to Latin American and Hispanic studies. One could not think of a better speaker than Vargas Llosa to reflect that commitment and the growing diversity of not just our university, but our city, our state, and our nation. Please join me in welcoming one of the most remarkable writers of the past century and the 2010 Nobel laureate in literature, Mr. Mario Vargas Llosa, who will be accompanied by and engaged in conversation with Miguel Angel Zapata, a poet and professor of literature at Hofstra University. Thank you.
So impressive. Can you hear me very well? To be here, thank you to the President and to all the people that made possible for us to enjoy the presence and the intelligence of Mario Vargas Llosa here in Rice University and in Houston. So I'm more than happy that I have the honor to be next to him to ask him some questions about his craft and writing, art, and to try to, for all of you to enjoy this conversation. Just wanted to tell you an anecdote that happened before the communication with Mario about his presence here at Rice University and the festival that we are having and ends tonight. I wrote Elizabeth, I don't know where Elizabeth is right now, and to tell her in an email to one of the assistants, Kenya, that Mario and I have decided to have this dialogue not in Spanish or English, but in Quechua. So, we don't have that talent we don't speak Quechua, you know, at least yet. But she believed me. She believed me that we were going to have the dialogue in Quechua. So, and then she texted me because she was in Austin in an activity or something that she was doing, and she said, Miguel Angel, you really can't do this to me. We agreed that the presentation was going to be, the dialogue, it was going to be in English, not in Quechua. Please, you have to change that. That was really amazing. And I told her that was a joke. Mario doesn't speak Quechua. The only word that we probably know is manancancho, which means no, you know. But anyway, so I wanted to start asking Mario. Mario Vargas Llosa is not perhaps, I think is the only writer that I've known that he has so much energy, and in the energy, that besides being a talented writer, obviously, but the energy and persistence in continued writing that I just compare. There are writers that just write 1, 2 novels, 1 book of poems, and they are celebrated and they feel happy, and that's it. They don't continue writing anymore. But I would compare this talent and energy with writers such as Victor Hugo, in literature, this energy, this constant energy that is never going to end. And in music with Camille Saint-Saëns, that in his 80s he was going to give a concert. People were thinking that he was going to retire and go to south of France to enjoy the weather. And with Picasso, that's my comparison in my comment, with the energy that Mario has for this persistence and this continuity in writing great masterpieces. Every novel, every book of essays that he's written is a masterpiece. I would like to ask you, Mario, how do you start this in how you continued with this energy, this power of the word in your life, and keep us reading your work since you were 22 years old and published Los Jefes, this collection of short stories, the Chiefs, and the translation. And would you like, please, that would be nice to you comment on this energy. Where do you get this amazing energy,
Well, there is no merit, Miguel Angel, because I enjoy so much what I do. It's such a pleasure for me to dedicate my life to writing and reading, that I can keep working and working because I don't have the feeling that I am working when I am writing or reading. It is true that writing requires a lot of conviction and perseverance, and that it's a work, But at the same time, I get such a pleasure of what I do. It's the building of a story, of a short story, or a play, or a novel. It's something that takes a lot of effort, but at the same time, it's so exciting to see how a story takes form, how the characters of the story are little by little acquiring some kind of independence from the narrator, how the characters little by little are becoming like human beings, independent characters who take decisions by themselves, that they resist imposition from the narrator, from the author. It's so fulfilling to have the impression that you are producing a kind of life with words and with imagination, that I don't think there is any merit in dedicate a lot of time and a lot of effort. I think it's a privilege for a person to are able to consecrate his life to what he likes to do, to feel that you are not working in the negative sense that working was mentioned in biblical terms as a kind of servitude for human beings. No, I think when you do what you like to do, when you are able to consecrate to life, to what is your vocation, you are not feeling that you are accomplishing a kind of condemn, but on the contrary, that you are realizing yourself, that you are acquiring a kind of plenitude in your life. And I think that is what happens when a writer writes, or a painter paints, or a musician composes or interprets something. And probably it's the same when a medicine doctor exercises his profession, which is also his vocation. And you can say the same for every person that is able to consecrate his life to what he likes. Unfortunately, I think not many people are really able to consecrate his time and his effort to what is his vocation. No? But when you do, as it is in my case, I think you must feel really a privileged person.
I read last week an interview in one of perhaps the best newspaper in Spain, El País, that you said something really wonderful and moving about literature. No? You said that literature is a way to keep hope alive. You said that literature is actually salvation. It's a refuge, a wonderful refuge for when we feel lonely, when we feel depressed, demoralized, defeated. So literature, you said, redeem us, save us. We have to, I'm quoting you, defend literature no matter what. That's what you said. And
well,
especially in these times where we live in, that everything is all technical now, and they don't want to, they want the book to disappear. So,
well, I think, well, first of all, literature, I think, is a great pleasure. Good literature, a good book, is something that produces an extraordinary pleasure. Pleasure in many senses is a pleasure, for example, to hear and to feel the language that is so enriched in a good literary book, novel or essay or play. The richness of the language is something that is so evident in good literature. You discover the possibilities of the language through the great books of literature. On the other hand, a novel, a short story, a play is something that make us live experiences that in real life we would never be able to experience. I think literature exists because there is this very old necessity of human beings of being different of what they are, or of having experiences that real life don't offer you in real life. And this is something that we have when we read a great book that is able to transform us in the characters of the story and make us live the episodes, the adventures, the experiences that live the characters of this book. And I think this feeling of being different of what we are, of share the extraordinary biographies of the characters of a novel, give us readers a fantastic perspective to understand better society, culture, other cultures, to understand better different traditions, different beliefs, different customs, different uses. And I think this enlargement of our perspective of life is something that makes us much more understanding of the differences that exist in the real world. On the other hand, I think the great contribution of literature to progress, to the progress of humankind, is that good literature produces in us a critical spirit. I think when we read Don Quixote or War and Peace or Moby Dick, and we return to the real world, I think we discover that the real world is so poor by comparison with these extraordinary worlds that we are able to invent and to express through language and through imagination in good literature. And this feeling, I think, this feeling of the big difference between the real world and the world that we are able to invent, that great writers are all able to invent, is something that makes us very critical of the world as it is now here. And I think this is something that has fueled changes, transformations in life. In a way, I think that without exaggeration, we can say that we are not anymore in the caves as the primitive men, and we have been able to travel to the stars because we were able to invent fictions that make us aware of the limitations of the real world to fulfill our desires, our appetites, our longings. And I think this is the great contribution, among others, of literature to the human progress. Developing in us readers this critical attitude to the world as it is here and now. And the ambition, the decision to transform this world, to make this world much more near our dreamed worlds, that is the worlds of literature.
Most of your themes have taken place in Peru, in your novels,
Yes.
right? Mm-hmm. But you have some novels like The Feast of the Ghost, The War of the End of the World, which are not specifically from Peru, but do you think it's crucial for a novelist, for a writer, to write about his or her surroundings, the place where you grew up? For example, you've written about the jungle.
I don't think that there are any kind of obligations for a writer. You know, I think a writer should write about what pushed him to write. As many writers, I don't have the impression that I choose freely the subjects of my stories. On the contrary, I have the impression that I am chosen by my stories to write about them. That is, I write about certain things because certain things have happened to me and have given me some images that my memory preserve, images that little by little I'm producing in myself a kind of fantasy, a kind of embryo of a history that little by little pushing me to write about something. So I don't think that I am totally free when I decide to write about something. I think the real freedom is something that I enjoy when I am writing about this thing that in a way has been imposed on myself because the experiences. When I am writing, when I have to choose the words, when I have to choose the way in which I will organize the time of the story, the way in which certain facts will be explicit and certain facts will be silenced to make them more important and to have a kind of secret influence in what is going on in the story. Yes, in this, I think I have total control of what I am doing. But in the choice of the subject, I don't think I am totally free, and I don't think writers are totally free. I think they are pushing away by their kind of lives that they have had, by the kind of psychology that they have to write about something. So I have written about Peru many things because I was formed, as a citizen, as a person, particularly in Peruvian reality, in Peruvian society, and I have the experiences that I share with Peruvians of my generation particularly. But I have lived also abroad, and I have read many things about foreign experiences, and in certain cases I have been so moved and even shocked by certain experiences and pushed to write about other countries, other societies. It was the case with the War of the End of the World, for example. I wrote this novel because I read a fantastic book, an extraordinary book by a Brazilian, Euclides Acunha, who wrote not a novel but an essay trying to explain a civil war that took place in Brazil at the beginning of the 20th century, a civil war that produced almost 40,000 deaths, and he wrote an essay trying to understand what had happened, and I was really traumatized by the book by Euclides Acunha, Oxertoes. I thought immediately, what happened in Brazil has been happening all over Latin America. All our countries have been divided and experienced massacres and tragedies very similar and exactly by the same reasons that produced the Canudos War in the interior of Bahia at the beginning of the 20th century. And I felt myself pushed to write about this. I cannot explain. There was not rational. It's something that happened to me. And it has happened to me, for example, in the case of The Dream of the Kelp. I read about this character, this Irish character who was in Congo when Congo was a colony of the Belgians, and that for so many years he was documenting secretly the horrors, the crimes, the incredible crimes that were committed by the colonizers, the Belgian colonizers in Congo during those years, the real genocide that was committed with the Congolese people, and I was so impressed with the character of this historical character that I decided to write about El Congo without being there once in my life. I went after I wrote the draft of the Nobel for the first time to Congo, and I discovered that the horrors, the crimes, the incredible brutalities that were committed against the Congolese people were still looming on the Congo of our days. That the tragedy of Congo is something that started during the colonization. Well, it was not even a colonization. Probably the Congo story is the most tragic of all countries, because you know how the Belgians took Congo. 14 countries were reunited in Berlin in a meeting where there was no one African, no one. And they decided to give as a present, to the king of the Belgians, the Congo, a country that was 18 times what is Belgium. And it was a gift of 14 countries in which there was no one African country represented. And that was the colonization of the Congo, a gift that civilized countries gave to the Leopoldo II, the first, I think, great genocide of the 20th century. So it was that experience, that pushed me to write about Congo. And I think everything that I have written has started like this, by an experience that was a real shock, an electric shock in my sensibility, in my fantasy, in my imagination. And for that reason is that I say that I don't have the impression that to choose freely, the subject of my stories.
It's interesting what you say about, because about the themes choose you. No? Mm-hmm. So they say, Mario, write about me, write about this topic.
Yeah, well, in a way, it's like that, yes.
You hear
the
that
ghosts,
voice.
Who came, And
you hear that voice, Poets also have said on many occasions, the great poets, that they don't want to write about something because they want to write about the eyes of a beautiful girl, a beautiful plaza, or a beautiful park, or a country, but also the themes choose them, for many reasons. And now that I'm talking about poetry, I know you are one of those writers that are unusual in the sense that many novelists that are, well, not every novelist is pedantic, but the ones that I met before, they were very vain about their first novel that they published. And I asked them, if you read poetry? They said, no, I don't read poetry. Why am I going to read poetry if I'm a novelist? Like saying, writing a novel is better than writing a book of poems. It can take you 25 years, like Paul Valéry, writing just one book. So what is your relationship with poetry? Does it inspire you? It give you something, this special sensibility? And I say this because you had to confess in public here that my admiration started growing towards your literature when I read the speech that you gave in 1967 in Caracas, Venezuela, and you rediscovered this great avant-garde poet from Peru,
Oquendo de Amat, yes.
Carlos Oquendo de Amat, which I recommend you. He just published one book, and the book is called 5 Meters of Poems, 5 metros de poemas. And you open the book like an accordion, and it measures 5 meters. So I know Oquendo from San Marcos University, where I studied, and I know by heart his poetry. And then I read, I said, this famous novelist from Peru, Mario Vargas Llosa. You were already, before the Rómulo Gallegos, you were very well known. But I have to admit here in public that it really made me so happy that you wrote about Oquendo de Amat. It put it on the map because he was not well known. And then you're reading about Vallejo, César Vallejo, perhaps the greatest poet of the 20th century in Spanish, I said perhaps. And you're reading about Carlos Germán Belli, Jorge Eduardo Eyelson, and this mythical figure that you also have helped the readers to invite us to read again, Cesar Moro, a wonderful surrealist poet. So what would be your...
I started as a poet, as everybody, I would say. I don't think you start to writing, if you have a literary vocation, I don't think you start writing short stories or novels. You always start writing poems. And I recognize that poetry is the king of literary genres, without any doubt. I think to be a great poet is more important than to be a great novelist or a great essayist or a great playwright. Poetry is something that represents the maximum richness of a language. It's something in which all the artistic and aesthetic possibilities of a language are really expressed. For that reason, I think the novelists, the playwrights, the essayists are frustrated poets. We must recognize that what we would like to be is a great poet. But the problem is that in poetry, as Borges said, only excellency should be admitted. And when you discover that you never will be an excellent poet, then you resign yourself to be a novelist. Well, this is my case. And I think this is the case of all novelists. But only a few will recognize this truth, So I recognize, well, in my case was even more problematic because I started not only writing poetry, but I published some poems. I have tried to disappear these little things of youth in my curriculum, but sometimes they reappear, and I feel so ashamed, But I keep reading poetry exactly as in my youth, and I enjoy enormously reading poetry. But I think it's a different experience to read poetry than to read novels. I think when you read poetry, you reach a kind of religious or a spiritual experience that the novel rarely produces. I think great poetry puts you in contact, in relationship with something that is very far away of the daily experiences, of the, let's say, the real world, experiences. I think there is a kind of sublimation of life, and a kind of a spiritualization of the sensibility, of the mind, of the ideas with great poetry. That is something that enriches you personally, profoundly, but I don't think this produces the kind of better relationship with the rest of human beings, as is the case of the novel or the stories, But I would say that in many, many cases, poetry has been a very important source of, let's say, inspiration, of motivation for writing my books. And I think in certain of my books, I have been much more nearer of the poetical experiences than in others. I think, for example, my second novel, La Casa Verde, is much more near the poetical experiences than the rest of my novels.
You also love art, and I'm quoting this book, Cuadernos de Don Rigoberto, Los Cuadernos de Don Rigoberto. Sí. I don't know the translation, perhaps Don Rigoberto's notebooks, perhaps with the translation. I don't remember the translation in English, because obviously I don't read your novels in English.
The notebooks of Don Rigoberto.
The notebooks of Don Rigoberto.
The notebooks of Don Rigoberto.
There is a feast of art in that book, eroticism and art. For the people that have read this novel, recommend this novel to read it. There is a, after each chapter, we were talking before, there is a drawing by this master painter from
Egon Schiele.
Egon Schiele, no?
Yeah.
And so did you choose that, to put the drawings, or, well, in the book there is Balthus, there's Bacon, Cislo, Rivera, Kahlo, all these famous Vermeer, all these famous Archimboldo, Rubens, all these famous
well, I like
painters.
Painting very, very much, and I think I would have liked to be a poet and also a painter. Huh? I admire very much great painters, and this kind of art has been very important, I think, for the formation of my sensibility, my fictional world. And in certain cases, as in at least two of my books, In Praise of the Stepmother and the notebooks of Don Rigoberto, the inspiration have come from painting and painters. In the case of the notebooks of Don Rigoberto, yes, it was after a visit to Vienna, to Austria, where there is a very rich collection of Egon Schiele works, which are not very, very big because he died very young, no? He died very, very young.
28, right?
Yeah, 28. But I saw the Egon Schiele paintings, and I was very, very much impressed by the beauty, but the violent beauty that he produced in his paintings. His paintings were about love, about pleasure, about sex, but at the same time, there was such a revolt attitude, no, behind all this presentation of the physical love, the way in which the human desires were expressed in his paintings with such force, you know, and at the same time, you could see in his paintings how this attitude towards love, to physical love, was something that had to do also with the environment, with the social environment of his time. He was put in jail, he was forbidden, he couldn't exhibit because his painting was absolutely aggressive against the official morality of the country, and obviously this was something that was a great challenge for him. No, he wanted to defy, you know, the status quo in moral terms, in artistic terms. So I started to read about Egon Schiele, and I discovered that his life was absolutely projected in his paintings, and little by little, as it happens to me with all the books that I have read, all the novels that I have written, I started to fantasize about him, about his time, and it was like that started this novel. As I had written previously about Don Rigoberto, a character that it was invented in the novel that is in a way the first part of the notebooks of Don Rigoberto, In Praise of the Stepmother. I decided to center the story around Don Rigoberto. But I would say that the protagonist of this novel is Egon Schiele. I had a very interesting experience writing this novel. I wanted very much, because as the main character was Egon Schiele, that this novel was more visible than auditive, than musical, that the phrase should be all the time trying to project, visual images in the reader, and all my, let's say, formal effort was to design or to find a kind of writing in which visual images would prevail over the musical ones of the. I wanted very much all the senses were projected in the vision, because I thought that if I could project this visual predominance in the story, the Egon Schiele would be much more convincing and much more representative of the work and the personal story of the character. No? It was a kind of experiment that I did, but it was inspired essentially in the paintings of this very great and tragic painter. No?
Now that you are in New York, you were telling me that you like to visit these shows and exhibits in Manhattan, right?
Yes. Well, New York, if you like painting, it's a fantastic place. There is much more exhibitions that you can really visit. That is the extraordinary richness in artistic terms of New York. Oh yes, it's fantastic. And the Picasso sculptures, for example, in the MoMA. In the Neue Galerie, there is a fantastic exhibition about Expressionism. In Berlin during the Weimar years, fantastic exhibition in which you can see how between the wars, between a catastrophe and another catastrophe, a fantastic creativity was produced in Berlin, in literature, in theater, in painting, in music. It was terrible because the fascists, the Nazis, and the communists were killing each other in the streets. And at the same time, the artists, the writers, the poets, were producing a fantastic works, no? In extraordinary richness, and at the same time, very expressive of the kind of chaos and feeling of the end of the war, at the beginning of another war, which was still very mysterious, were living in Berlin. It's not a very large, but it's such exciting and educative experience of what was probably the life in Berlin between wars, no? Between the First and the Second World War. No?
I agree. Yeah, New York probably is the city that has more museums in the planet, everywhere you go. And there is a famous tragic painter that is alive still in the United States, and he's a politician. Mm-hmm. And I would like to ask you, it has nothing to do with being Republican or Democrat. It's just that we have to talk a little bit about politics. No? I know you've written extensively about politics, and you tried to be president of Peru, right? So now the elections are coming in Peru next year, and also in the United States, and I would like to know who will be your choice. For
the United States.
No, first in
it
Peru.
It won't be Donald Trump. No. Certainly not. No.
Okay. Thank you for mentioning it, because I was about to ask you about this. This was the tragic painter that I was telling you. Is because I've never seen a politician in any country, civilized country, that is so racist against our kind. And I don't understand how can be still running as a president. And I know there are supporters of Donald Trump, perhaps in this audience there are, that hate the Mexicans and hate the Hispanics, that thinks that we came here to steal the richness of the United States and we're just bringing poetry and literature. That's all we're bringing, right? So, do you think that he has a chance to be a president?
No, I don't think he has any chance.
Please explain.
I can say absolutely, let me, I don't like predictions in politics because I know that in our century we have seen such incredible episodes that sometimes we think that anything can happen in politics. But I am absolutely convinced that Donald Trump will never be president of the United States. I think he will never be president of this country. I think in this country, the democratic values are so deeply rooted. It's been something that has followed in the history of the United States since the beginning of this country until now. And this, I think, makes impossible that a candidate that is producing the kind of hate, the kind of caricature of immigration, the way in which he's using racialism, could be elected could be elected the president of the United States. But on the other hand, I think it's a shame that a candidate is using the kind of arguments that he is using against immigration. First of all, we must remember that the United States was created by immigrants. And the extraordinary prosperity and modernity that the United States has reached and enjoys is something that has been produced in great part by immigrants of all over the world. And I think the great policy that has permitted this extraordinary advance and progress of the United